Greetings, everybody. This is Eric Cook with WSI Digital Marketing, and I would like to welcome you to my monthly Banker Education Series webinar show. This is episode number 10, and it's almost a replay with new information of my very first episode, number 1, because I'm very excited to have Doug Johnson from the ABA back with me. And as we were chatting in the pre-call, I asked Doug if he remembered what we were doing last year at this time when I had the idea of doing the Banker Education Series. And Doug and I actually had the opportunity to meet at a conference with the Southeastern Community Bankers down in the Florida Keys. And he delivered a presentation on .bank and got everybody down there excited and aware of .bank and the pending .insurance. And so when I decided I wanted to launch a Banker Education Series for all my banker buddies, it was an easy decision on my part to go ahead and bring him in as the first show. And so now I'm excited to kick off 2016 with the first show of the new year, talking about .bank and update and talking a little bit more about .insurance. So before we officially get started and turn the mic over to Doug and let him do his thing, just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, again, I want to thank you for joining me. This episode and all episodes are recorded and made available here at the Banker Education Series page. So you can go to poweredbywsi.com/BES or just type in Banker Education Series and that'll get you there, and you can see episode 9, for example. The green button that says register will turn to a watch the recording here, and you can go through and browse any of the other recordings that you would like to do so. And depending on how you heard about today's show, you may have gotten an email update from me, or you may have read about it or seen it on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any other social platform. If you'd like to get reminders for future shows of different things that we'll be talking about here on Banker Education Series, you can go here and actually just click on the sign up for email reminders, and that'll get your name added to the list. Promise no spam, but we'll make sure that you know when future shows are coming up, and you can stay informed. And then lastly, I guess on my list of to-do items, I want to encourage you, and I know that there are questions because I talk to lots of bankers, and you know, if you have a question that you would like to ask that has not been addressed, feel free to go ahead and use the chat function, which is in your control panel, probably floating to the right of your computer screen. And I'll monitor those during today's presentation. And as there is a break in the action, we'll go ahead and ask those questions for you. So feel free to use the chat functionality and let us know what you're thinking. So with that, it is my, again, great pleasure to welcome Doug Johnson to my webinar today and being our guest to talk about .bank, .insure. I know he's got a couple of zingers and jokes kind of woven into his presentation as well. So I'm looking forward to it. Doug, thank you for joining me today.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about first .bank, which we, as you know, have already deployed, and then a little bit about .insurance to the extent that you would be interested in also having an insurance domain for your insurance customers and clients. On the second slide, it really demonstrates what the discussion is going to be about today. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is go through very briefly how the Internet is changing in terms of its infrastructure and what we've been doing to respond, because obviously there's a necessity for our industry to first defend ourselves, but also take advantage of changes in the net so we can better serve our customers. And so what we've been doing over the course of the last 5 years really is helping prepare the industry overall and specific individual institutions in their efforts to really position themselves to be able to use security as a good proactive story for your customers. And that's really, I think, what you'll see as part of this conversation today is how some individual institutions are marketing .bank in a way that really is allowing them to tell a positive, proactive story associated with the way that they're addressing the security threats that we have within our world these days. And then I'll close with some discussion again about .insurance and what we're doing this year as it relates to the deployment of that domain. So slide 3 runs through some of the domains that are out here. When we last gathered, as Eric indicated in the .bank 1.0 presentation a while back, one of the things I was stressing was the fact that, ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, was very explicit about 8 years ago that they had every intention of really expanding the Internet domain space from 23 or so domains to really as many as the market would bear. And this slide is an example of some of the domains that are out there at this particular juncture. And at the end of the day, 1,900 applications for individual domains were filed, and about 1,500 will ultimately be deployed. About 800 of them have already been deployed. And so we'll continue to see expansion associated with the domains, and each of them have their own little idiosyncrasies in their little communities. Eric has been bugging me forever, for instance, because he wants to tie up a bunch of .guru domains. He wants ericcook.guru because he's got a following. He's got a following, obviously, among you on the phone today. And so I said, Eric, that's fine. Go to it. Pay your money to GoDaddy and just have at it. And that's kind of one of the points associated with what we did with .bank and .insurance, because Eric didn't have to prove any bona fides. All he had to do was pay his money and he could get the domain. And that's precisely what we did not want to have happen with .bank. We wanted to be able to control the entry into the domain. So that's essentially what we did. But all these domains have been fairly subtle so far in terms of the publicity associated with them. I'll use .car in a moment as an example of one that is starting to get a little bit of publicity. But individual geographic communities as well have tried to do that as well, and that's where .nyc comes in. So let's go to the next slide and talk about .car for a moment. What we saw in the not too distant past was an indication, and there's always been some level of suspicion that Apple was going to get into the car business. Obviously, Google is already there to some degree. There's interplay between Ford and some of the taxi services that are mobile, that kind of stuff. And so Apple essentially put some folks on notice that they had a level of interest when they went and applied for and soon will be operating the domains apple.car, applecar.car, and several others, rather one other. And so the very fact that Apple felt it necessary to apply for apple.car is interesting and potentially positioning, and they may not even know, frankly, what they're going to do with that particular domain yet. But nonetheless, you're going to start to see over the course of this year increased media attention toward these domains. And one of the things I'll do today is show you how a financial institution, one in particular, has positioned themselves to be able to really use media to help tell their story. But I also mentioned .nyc, and of course there are communities like .london and .berlin and .nyc that are geographically based. And so I wanted to give you an example of some positioning within .nyc. So Eric, why don't we go to that video that I sent you?
Before we do that, I just want to make sure the audience realizes that the reference of ericcook.guru was one of the jokes that you were preparing that I alluded to in the introduction. I'm not interested in getting a .guru, although I did tell you Eric Cook is a .guru was probably the one that I would go after, but I just want to make sure humor doesn't always come through on webinars very well. So I wanted to make that very, very well disclosed, I guess.
Actually, I think he's protesting too much, don't you guys?
Yeah, type it into the chat box if you think I'm protesting too much. We'll get some interactivity. All right, let's continue on with NYC and John Oliver here. I think we've lost your audio, Doug. You have gone mute. Can you just, there we go.
Oh, am I supposed to?
There we go. Yeah, I think we're losing your audio a little. There we go.
I've got my audio up.
Oh, you want me to go ahead? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Sorry. I didn't know if you wanted to give a little introduction on this.
No,
okay,
I just go right to it.
All right, let's go ahead and play this here real quick.
We've got an exciting internet opportunity. The city's top-level domain, .nyc, is now available to all New Yorkers. That's right, New Yorkers are now eligible to purchase .nyc domain names because sometimes a Wesleyan alumni email address isn't enough to let people on the internet know you live in Brooklyn. There was an immediate rush to register web addresses, even from ex-mayor Michael Bloomberg.
The law firm representing Bloomberg's foundation purchased several hundred .nyc addresses related to his name. Some are normal, like official Mike Bloomberg.nyc, but some aren't as flattering, like Mike Bloomberg is a dweeb.nyc or Mike is too short.nyc.
It's too short to be president.nyc. I'm guessing, it's just a thought, but I'm guessing this all began with Bloomberg walking up to his staff and saying, what do people like to say about me? And after about 400 suggestions, saying, okay, stop, let's just buy all of them.
So thanks for showing that, Eric. I wanted to do that because one of the things that we were concerned about with .bank is the necessity, if we didn't own .bank and if we weren't the gatekeeper, and I'll explain who we is in a moment, that you as individual institutions would have to do these kind of Michael Bloomberg is too short to be president defensive filings. You know, we all know that as institutions we've had to have a defensive as well as an offensive strategy as it relates to the net, and we've had to, frankly, even apply for misspelling derivations of our domain names because we know that if we didn't apply for them ourselves, that others would get them and they would use them to essentially phish our customers. And so we wanted to ensure by the use of or the operation of .bank that we, to the extent that we had individual companies within .bank, that they were verified, that they were actually financial institutions. And so that's what we've essentially accomplished by this effort as well. Now the next slide goes into a little bit of the we in terms of who is really, let's go through this one first. In addition, we also knew that there were a wide number of other financial domains that we needed to be wary of to some degree, and I still want to bring those to your attention because the ones that are in red on this chart, the .trading, the .insure, the .financial, the .invest, and .mortgage of the world, none of those are owned by financial institution operators. And so there's a potential and probability of a great degree of confusion amongst our customers as these domains deploy as well. And I think part of our education process needs to be ensuring that our customers are aware that these are not operated by the financial services industry, because I do believe there is the chance for more than just a little bit of funny business, frankly, in some of these domains. And there may also be some misunderstanding among our customers and a feeling that because .mortgage is .mortgage, that somehow a site that they go to in .mortgage is essentially a legitimate site. And I think we need to warn our customers to the degree that that might not be the case. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. Plus the operations in blue, different institutions are also going and applying for and now operating some of these domains as Barclays Card, for instance, and BBVA. And we'll see more of that as well, going forward. Now, the next slide does go through the organizational structure of the company that we put together to own and operate the domain, FTLD Registry Services. And as you see, it's a third operated by the ABA, a third owned by the Financial Services Roundtable, and then we have another third that are owned by other financial services operators and investors. And what we have done is contract with VeriSign the operator of .com to run the registry. And that's important because VeriSign is operating essentially the largest domain, as we know, in the world, and we essentially, with .bank and .insurance, are able to piggyback on their redundancy. So all the servers that they have over the world are really, from a load balancing standpoint, at our disposal. And so, for instance, we recognize that .bank could potentially be a very attractive target and theoretically a single point of failure for denial of service attacks, to the extent that some people wish to do us harm. But what we've really determined in discussions with VeriSign and other registries is that VeriSign really has the load balancing capacity to be able to withstand some of that, or all of that traffic, really, because essentially they're attacked every second, and they're very proud of the fact that they've essentially have 100% operation since they began operations of .com. And so we also contracted with Symantec to verify that you are exactly who you say you are, that you are a financial institution that has the right to operate in .bank because you have a charter, and that you are actually the person or a person within that bank that has the authority on the part of the bank to apply for that domain. And so that's what we really set up, is a process whereby Symantec will provide us with the validation that this is a legitimate site and this is a legitimate individual who's operating on behalf of that financial institution. And there on the registrar side, you see some of the key approved registrars which exist that can be used by you to essentially operate .bank. And that's essentially the process we're going to go through on .insurance as well. So going to the next slide, what we've essentially shown you here is the broad breadth of potential or existing endorsers and founders of FTLD. You see that it's a global domain. We've got global trade associations and global financial institutions as part of this particular operation. And we really do expect to see more worldwide operation of the domains over time. And one of the reasons why, as demonstrated on the next slide, are the various key differentiators that we see for .bank and .insurance. I've talked about some of the operational requirements, and they obviously do deal with the eligibility standards, and the fact that we are making sure that not only are you eligible, but you have a right to the name. You have to prove that you're using the name in commerce in order to get the domain, so that other people can't essentially, unless they have that right, and if they get to it on a first-come, first-served basis, they can use it. But if they don't use it in commerce now, that doesn't mean that they can have the opportunity to use it in the .bank domain. So that saves defensive filings to some degree, but it also provides, I think, a greater clarity to the market as well. We also avoid essentially the proxy registrations, and what that would mean is that someone applies for a domain and they really obscure who is applying for that domain in the WHOIS database or otherwise, so that you really don't know who the owners are. We know who the owners are of each of the domains that are in .bank, and we mandatorily verify that each and every one of them is adhering to the technical standards which are located on this chart, as well as other technical standards as well. There is a requirement for those of you that are technical that domain name security, DNSSEC, is deployed what's called across the registration chain. And from your standpoint, that's important because this is the only domain, this and .insurance are the only domains where DNSSEC and all the security requirements around it are deployed at your level, at the second level, at your bank.bank, as opposed to just .bank. And so that provides a much higher level of security at the second level. But what we also require is that from the standpoint of email, to the extent that you use email within .bank, that you're using an email authentication program that allows you to essentially have a higher degree of propensity or ability, to essentially send authenticated email to your customers, so that not only if you as a customer or at a .bank site and have a higher degree of confidence that you are in fact at your bank site, if you get an email from a .bank email address, your customer has a higher degree of confidence that that email is actually coming from you. And so I think over time we're going to see marketers be increasingly interested in that as a functionality. So the next slide, for those of you that went through the process, shows
actually,
the
Doug,
bank. Yes.
We've a couple questions related to email. Do you mind if we go ahead and throw those out now?
Go right in. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So two things. One question is, as it relates to email, is it the ultimate intent to be able to use a .bank email to send confidential information, like balance, account numbers? Will a level of encryption provide a bank the ability to email that type of data as a standard email under the .bank domain name and not be interceptable or kind of discoverable like a regular plain text email coming off of their .com right now?
I think that may be further down the line. I don't see that as an initial functionality. I think that what we need to do first is to understand the promises that we can make our customers associated with email authentication generally, and the fact that an email is actually coming from the financial institution. And to the extent that we can generate and have as high a level of confidence as possible that we've been able to accomplish that, I think that's when we can get into considerations of how we might effectively be able to use what would essentially be a secure pipeline to be able to send confidential information. So I think it's kind of an incremental process, frankly.
Okay. And then the other question that I've had from several banks actually is, if they make the migration to .bank for their website domain, do they have to also make the migration to .bank for all of their email communication?
No. In fact, one of the things that we're seeing in the market is that banks are looking at that incrementally as well. They're moving their internet banking functionality first, and looking at moving their email authentication or their email functions later.
Okay, gotcha. Two very common questions that I get anytime I talk about .bank, so I wanted to make sure we got those in there. Good. All right, let's take a look at the timeline next. We're here on slide 10.
Well, I'm sure that quite a few of you went through this process regarding .bank. As you know, on June the 23rd of last year, we launched the domain to really the entire population of banks. Before that period, we had the opportunity for those that had specific trademark rights to secure those rights beforehand. And then June the 23rd, as I indicated, was a very important day. And I find it actually very gratifying that we had projected that by the end of 2015 that we would have about 2,500 domains registered within the domain. And we actually had, in the first 20 minutes of operation on June the 23rd, after we opened up the gates, we had over 3,000 registrations in place in the first 20 minutes. So it was very heartening, and I think an indication of a level of success that we're going to have as these domains now become deployed. And so the next slide gives you an indication of where we did end up by the end of the year last year. And we now, as of the end of last year, have about, well, actually at that point, over 6,100 domain registrations. And as you see, the 2,500 applicants on average got more than 2, in some cases 3 or 4, in some cases more than that, domains when they registered. We still have a few to go to still approve. You see, we've gone through almost 6,000 of those for registration approval. About 93% of those domains are from United States companies. Only 7% now are from other countries, but the distribution is interesting because the 43 other countries are important because those are going to be footprints that allow us to expand the domain over time. There are some countries that on an OFAC basis or otherwise we are not entertaining applications from. If any particular bank is from a country that is sanctioned, or if the bank has some difficulty from an anti-money laundering or OFAC perspective, we have essentially the intention of prohibiting them from being in the domain. On the next slide, I think it really gives you an opportunity, if you really can't sleep at night, to have a document that will help you do so. We recognize that it's all fine and good to have over 6,000 registrations, but if individual companies don't implement those registrations well, then we really haven't succeeded. And so the big push now is to really have institutions go live. And I'll give you an example of one institution that has gone live. There's about 40 to 50 banks right now that are live in .bank. So it's frankly a slower process, but we still make progress. And one of the things we wanted to do was to give every institution the opportunity to have a guide to help them particularly talk about .bank to executive leadership, talk to management about why .bank is important, why leveraging .bank can be important messaging for the institution to demonstrate, as I said earlier, to customers that you've taken a proactive, positive step to enhance security and to enhance trust. We've provided marketing materials for you to really look to your internal and external stakeholders and talk to them about the domain. And then we drill down even further in the document to really give you common English language to talk to management about the security requirements, and so that you can really further understand them yourselves to the extent that you're not technicians. And so it runs through the gamut of what the additional requirements are, how those additional requirements are met, and other considerations regarding the resources that are necessary to do this. And another very important one down under other considerations is working with third-party vendors, because we recognize that the Fiservs and the FISs and the Jack Henrys of the world are very important partners in this process, and we're working very closely with each of those core processors and others to ensure that we understand any hurdles that they're running into, and that we also ensure that we work with them to ensure that somebody owns the process of migration toward .bank within the core processors. Because what we found initially is that while the organizations and the cores were understanding of the fact that .bank was here, there in some cases wasn't anybody in the core processor that was owning the process to work toward implementation. And so we're working really closely with the processors to try to make that happen. On the next slide, and this is if you really can't sleep at night, for the techies in the room. Yes, go ahead.
We have a question if you want to interrupt your sleep strategy here. We got a couple of questions. Yeah.
Go right ahead.
So there was a question. I think I know the answer, but I think it's important to ask it so that everybody knows. One person says, can a bank purchase the .bank domain and not migrate to it as long as they're willing to pay the ongoing registration fees? In other words, is there any sort of a time frame where they have to begin starting the .bank migration?
There is not. Obviously, it's our preference to have as early adoption and implementation as possible, but there is no specific timeline as long as the annual license is paid.
Okay. And then the other question is related to this guide here. I'm sure you'll provide a link later on, but just while it's up, where can people download that? Off the FTLD site or ABA or both? Both.
And I'll show you how that happens in a little bit. But the next slide does provide a much deeper dive into the technical security requirements associated with the domains. And of course, .bank and .insurance are going to have the same effective levels of security. So this is essentially the identical process that you would go through. And it has an even more extensive annex associated with working with third-party service providers as well. And it's based upon our experience and our discussions with those providers, because we recognize that the more that we can assist you in having those conversations and really addressing any of the potential roadblocks that might occur, the greater level of implementation that we'll actually have. So going further, I think the next slide is really the start of the marketing story. We've seen some very good examples lately of banks and the manner in which they have been marketing .bank. And I think that Lead Bank out of Kansas City has really done what I think is an excellent job of really positioning themselves and talking and communicating with their customers regarding, what they've done here. And so I wanted to give you an example of what happened with them after they put out their modest basic press release, and local media picked up on it and wanted to know more about what the bank had done. So Eric, if you would go to the video on that, and you're welcome to start it.
Yep, sounds good.
Well, we've been warned. New data from the Federal Trade Commission shows that identity theft is the #1 consumer complaint in the U.S. Here in Missouri, we rank 4th as one of the top places for identity theft and fraud complaints. The Now KC's Allison Bruner explains how a new feature will help change this.
We all want to keep our money safe, especially when it comes to banking online. That's why a local bank is taking an extra measure to help protect us.
Lead Bank is one of the first banks in the Kansas City area to roll out a new domain.
It offers a higher level of encryption.
Lead Bank will soon make the switch from .com to .bank, meaning more protection to keep those cyber criminals away.
Only banks can have it. So if you're if you're looking for a bank site, you're going to know whether it's truly a bank or some other kind of financial institution or some kind of financial services company that's trying to act as if it's a bank.
One of the newest inventions to keep us safe when banking online.
The increase in the use of digital platforms for people to do their banking, it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure that we're providing the safest possible channel.
A platform that continues to grow. According to Pew Research, 51% of us bank online, the same percentage of online bankers Josh sees locally.
More and more and more people want access online.
We can also take responsibility. Here's some advice.
More passwords, better passwords, more email accounts, and just don't click on links in suspicious emails.
A local bank leading the way in cybersecurity.
Josh tells me we can expect that domain to change from .com to .bank sometime later this summer. Justin?
Thousands of banks across the country have applied for the new domain, but almost all of them still in the verification process.
There we go.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you running that for us. So I really think that's a very positive message that the bank has been able to discuss with their customers in local media during the evening news. And I think that a couple things happened there that were very positive. And the first thing is, obviously, the bank was able to position itself, like I've been continually discussing, as taking positive steps toward enhancing cybersecurity as these threats get more sophisticated. But I think the second thing that happened there was it also gave the bank an opportunity to talk to their customers about security generally, about the kind of cybersecurity hygiene that the individual customer has to accomplish as well. Because as we all know, it's only when we have the partnership between the bank and the customer that we can actually most effectively protect the environment. And so, again, I think that's a two-part harmony that they were able to accomplish there, which is very important. Now, on this slide, I take another one that really is attractive and their name just makes it so as well, is Dollar Bank. Dollar.bank has been deployed, and the manner in which they've essentially transformed their landing page is to again talk about security from the standpoint of their web presence. And so I think they're showing again that same proactivity, and also taking advantage of the wonderful name that they have, at the same time. And so you're going to see more and more of this in your local markets going forward as these domains get deployed. And so I just would suggest that it is nice positioning to be the first to market in your local markets, and to understand, what you might be able to do to essentially claim that particular positioning within your local market. So the next slide, and I mentioned Barclays earlier. Barclays was really one of the first companies to ditch, as they say, their .com domains, and they went fully over to .barclays and .barclaycard. And they, again, talk about it as creating a more secure and streamlined experience for their customers. And I like the language here from their CIO, talking about the domain name creating a simplified online user experience, making it crystal clear to their customers if they're engaging with a genuine Barclays site. This clarity enables us to provide an even more secure service. That's the kind of messaging that I think is really important in this day and age. And I think that again, being first in your market to do that is an important consideration. A couple other points I'd like to make at this point too. One of them is regarding the lead bank video. Yes, it's true that only banks can be within the domain, with a very important exception, and that exception is core processors and other important service providers. And we've seen a number of service providers and the core processors really recognize that, to the extent that they're providing a website under their name, for you as customers, that they still need to have that capacity. And we recognize that it would actually make no sense at all for you to have a .bank landing page that is more secure than your internet banking platform, which was housed over at the core processor. And so to avoid that, it made absolutely perfect sense to allow the cores to have the same kind of structure in place that they have in place now going forward. And the other piece is that while Josh talked about mobile banking, and that news clip talked about mobile banking being increasingly popular, and it is true that as we do, we ask customers every August, or bank customers, what is their primary delivery channel that they prefer at their financial institution. And it was 3 years ago that internet banking surpassed the branch, and we see mobile banking slowly creeping up. And I just wanted to make the point that a lot of the technology, the security technology that's under the covers associated with this is just as effective at remaining under the covers in a mobile banking environment. So it's doubly effective. These security measures assist you both in the mobile as well as the desktop and tablet environments as well. So the next slide shows you where to go to get a variety of materials. The first site that went up on .bank was register.bank. And so if you haven't gone through the registration process yet, essentially the way that you would start to secure your domain is to type in your Envision domain in the box there, and that will tell you whether or not the domain is even available. And once you get to the point where the domain is available, it will walk you through the process. It will take you through the registrar pages so you can see the various components of the registrars. Registrars are not all the same, and while pricing we see has come in essentially around $1,000 per domain, and that's the retail price that we don't control. Some registrars will bake more services into that than others will, and so it's important to shop around the various approved registrars, and they have mostly done a good job of having transparency into what's available and what's not available. For the fee, what kind of add-on services could be essentially provided. You see that all of the .bank policies and all of the other materials would be available off of this site as well. In the overview section is where you could actually go to request a download of the implementation guide, which I discussed. And there's a very extensive FAQ that's on the site as well. We continually add to the FAQ as we do webinars, such as this one that we're doing here. When we did a webinar at ABA about, I guess, May of last year, we had over 1,000 participants on the webinar among the membership, and we incorporated the barrage of questions that we received off of that webinar, into that FAQ for your use. So the next slide talks about the .insurance timeline, and what you'll see is that mid-year this year is when we're going to delegate insurance, open it up for registration, and so I think one of the important things to do at this juncture, and this is even if you're not interested in the .insurance domain, still consider registering any trademarks that you have within the Trademark Clearinghouse, and continue to do so, because the Trademark Clearinghouse that ICANN has put together is not just about ensuring that you can participate in a sunrise period, which would allow you in .insurance, just like in .bank, to register early, for domains. It also protects you in all of the variety of other domains, the 1,500 that we were talking about, to some degree. Because if you register in the Trademark Clearinghouse, say using $Bank as an example, $Bank now, anytime someone attempts to register $Bank in any of those 1,500 domains, Bank gets a notification that has happened, and then Dollar has the opportunity to essentially contest that application. Now they and proactively contest the application in order to prevent it from being delegated or approved, but at least they get notification, and at least they are aware of their rights. And so I think that's another important thing that we are going to have to consider, because ICANN had so much fun this time that they've signaled that, and my estimate would be within a couple years, that they're going to open up another round. And so we'll see another round of domains opening up. And just like we saw, for instance, insure as well as insurance, and we tried to prevent insure from being delegated, and ICANN essentially did not allow, or they did allow the delegation even though we protested it. We'll see the same thing in the next set of domains, and we, on your behalf, are going to have to apply for .banking, .banker, .bankers, just to protect you. And each one of those is going to have to cost us, it's going to cost us about $180,000 just in the registration or application fee alone. We had to raise $3.5 million to essentially apply for and now operate .bank and .insurance. And so the ability of us to protect your interests because of the large numbers of registrations which we've received in .bank and the ones we anticipate in .insurance, those proceeds we're essentially banking for the purposes of protecting our interests going forward as an industry. ICANN has already indicated that there's a good possibility that this rollout in a couple years will be their last round, because the round will never close. Just pause on that for a moment. We're going to have a perpetual round where for an infinite time period, companies and individuals can apply for top-level domains. And so I think it's important for us to be mindful of that and always working toward protecting the interests of the industry, as well as proactively trying to take advantage of the opportunity we have to better serve our customers, from a security standpoint. So there are some issues that are specific to insurance on the next slide that I'd like to just briefly go over. We are really interested in your interest in .insurance domains. We're spending a lot of time talking to financial institutions about the viability of them using a .insurance domain for their insurance and their annuity and maybe other investment products to differentiate from the banking side of the house, but also potentially deploy and be a delivery vehicle for those products. And we get a sense that obviously there is not going to be as great a level of bank interest in .insurance as .bank. We do believe that there are going to be banks that take advantage of the ability to differentiate. From a compliance standpoint, frankly, it's handier as well because, as you know, there are requirements on the compliance side of having some level of differentiation, between these products that are federally insured versus those products that aren't federally insured. But we also recognize that the industry structure for insurance is just different than banking, and that, for instance, the large insurers will have a tendency to capture their domain. We have many of the large insurers as part of our founders. And what they'll do is capture the top-level domain, and then their agents will be populated under those domains as opposed to having those individual domains themselves. And I do think that also what we've seen is less of a cybersecurity imperative as it relates to certain insurance products, with auto and property among them. That doesn't mean that there's no security imperative, but there's less transactional activity. But that there may be more of a cybersecurity imperative as it relates to the health insurance and the need to protect vital person identifiable information. And so we would see, I think, more of a ramp up on the health side than, say, potentially on the auto or the property side potentially. And then lastly, there's just less of a use of the word insurance internationally as opposed to the word bank or derivations of bank, like banque, B-A-N-Q-U-E. So that's, I think, going to also potentially limit insurance to some degree as well. And so those are just some differentiators that we see. But I know that really, for your purposes, it's really the banking domain that is of greatest interest. So what I'd like to do is close with a slide giving you contact information and some websites to get this information from. Really, all the information we've talked about today is available at those 3 websites. And here are 3 folks, 2 others besides myself, that you feel free to contact if you have any further questions about any of this. Craig Schwartz, we're very lucky to have as the managing director of FTLD. He was formerly working with ICANN and managing registry services there, and so he's been instrumental in our operations and ramping up. And Sam Lister is one of my partners in crime here at ABA, and he'd be very happy to help you as well. So, Eric, with that, what I'd like to do is go to the question slide and see if there's any questions among the group.
Excellent. Good. As a reminder, if you've got a question, I see a handful of you have figured that out already and have started typing some questions in. But if you have not done so and you do have a question, feel free to go ahead and enter it in. I've got my eye on those, and we'll go ahead and in the last 10 or so minutes that we've got together, we'll see if we can get some of these covered. So type your questions in, but while we're waiting, go back to the example that you gave for Dollar Bank. And, they've registered their or trademarked their Dollar Bank. They've got that in place. It's been submitted to the registry, and somebody goes on and they want to register dollarbank.savings. And because it's a registered, trademark protected domain name, they get a phone call or an email that says, hey, somebody's trying to get dollarbank.savings. What happens next? does the bank have to purchase that? Can they not give authorization but not have to spend the money? Is there you know, a smaller amount that they can use to take that off of the table? Because I can see somebody going after a bank like Dollar Bank and just trying to register all the attempts, and then putting somebody like that in a corner where if they don't register the name and take it, then somebody's grabbing it. But if somebody's just doing it to be nasty, you know, can you comment a little bit about the process of really protecting and that defensive standpoint?
Sure, that's a great question too, Eric. So Dollar Bank is a great example because they're very aggressive about protecting their brand, because it's an important brand. And so what would happen in that case with dollarbank.savings is, like you said, Dollar Bank would get a notification, most likely by email. I believe they do send something snail mail as well. And it gives Dollar a period of time in which to enter into what is called the ICANN dispute resolution process. And so what ICANN will do is they will look at Dollar's claim that they have trademark rights and have protected those rights within the Trademark Clearinghouse. And then as long as Dollar has done that, as long as Dollar has entered into the dispute resolution process, it's pretty much game over for the entity that tried to capture the name. But it's something that Dollar has to continually pay attention to, because if you've got 1,800 domains out there, or 1,500 ultimately, you know, that someone, like you said, could be a real nuisance to them. So there needs to be, just as part of your overall trademark and reputational protection protocols, this needs to be just part of it, is what it amounts to. And another part of it is to look for those misspellings, because misspellings are not protected by trademark in these particular cases within the Trademark Clearinghouse. And so within all those other 1,500 domains, there's still the potential for someone to try to squat on your misspelled names and then try to sell them to you. So there is a way to effectively protect and at a fairly low cost your trademark names, but there's still may be a necessity to do some defensive filings within those other 1,500 for misspellings and things like that. Things like that would still be unprotected.
Okay, good. Another question comes through. Do the banks have to use the registrar that they used for their .bank domain name purchase to host their website?
No. You can use. You can choose to host your own DNS. You can choose to host it elsewhere. It just has to have the appropriate DNSSEC associated with it, and the other security protocols.
Yeah. I'm going to take a brief opportunity to throw a little bit of a commercial in, but with regards to our client sites, we do web development, obviously, for the banking industry, and being a former banker, know it pretty well. We've actually developed a virtual private server environment that's got the necessary things in place, and had conversations with several registrars and Doug as well to make sure we understood what type of an environment. I don't know as if you would necessarily want to go to a GoDaddy per se, but I don't know of many websites that are bank websites that are hosted at GoDaddy anyhow. But it does require that you at least have an SSL certificate installed on your server and a minimum level of security as it relates to the security capability of that server. So you want to just make sure, look at the technical requirements, and if your hosting provider is not able to support that, you know, then certainly check around. But that was a good question.
Yes, and yes, you could use. I mean, if you wanted to, you could use GoDaddy as the host. But like you say, people don't. We haven't even approved GoDaddy as a registrar to run you through the registration process, and that's because, frankly, they weren't interested. The volume isn't there. That's just not their game. But I think the other question, the other thing that you indicated about the SSL certificates is an important point, because you do have a choice. SSL is accepted as a security protocol. Some individual companies, and Dollar is one of them, has taken this opportunity to go to extended validation. And so if you go to their .bank site, you'll see the green bar. And that's just a nice visual. I know it comes at a cost. It comes with additional infrastructure, but that is a nice visual that I have a personal preference for. But it isn't required. Like Eric said, SSL is sufficient.
Right, right. Somewhat related to the other question about buying the .bank domain and holding it, talk a little bit about the ability or maybe inability of taking .bank and just forwarding it to your .com until you're ready to implement it. Is that allowable? Is it frowned upon? Is it forbidden? Because I've gotten that question from a number of banks that have said, well, can't I just point it to .com and then everybody will, think that I've got it, but then when we're ready to go, doesn't that do the same thing?
We have signaled, we recognize two things. We recognize that, first of all, it's important to get .bank implemented, but it's also important to maintain the levels of security in .bank when you're working with your customers on transactional bank sites. So we've signaled through guidance that we are closely looking at the issue of redirection from .bank to .com. We're not disallowing it at this particular point, but there is going to be at some point in the future where there's going to be levels of restriction around it. Clearly there's some less sensitive information on some sites that you could redirect to, and that would make sense. But to redirect to a transactional banking site that doesn't have the same levels of protection as your homepage makes no sense, and actually I think creates some potential reputational risk for the institution as well. And so I think, Eric, at some point this year, we're going to be putting in some restrictions associated with redirection. Yeah.
What I've read, and I kind of learned this before, outside of conversations with you, is a lot of the registrars will also, recommend if you want to take your .com and send it to a .bank, that's totally fine because you're increasing the level of security that they're getting as a result of their visit. But because consumers may not catch the .bank redirect to .com, some of the registrars I know are not allowing that, or some are even providing complimentary landing pages that says .bank coming soon, click here to visit our .com site until then. So it's clear and conspicuous to the consumer. But again, we're talking banking here and privacy and security, so I think full disclosure and going above and beyond is definitely warranted. So I know that was a question a lot of bankers have.
Absolutely. We want to make appropriate security promises, but we don't want to make promises we can't keep, and we want to keep the promises we make. And so I think that what you just said is real important in terms of ensuring that we do what we say we're going to do, and that is, take these proactive steps and maintain those levels of security.
Yep. One last question is on the off chance that the core processor doesn't have .bank set up, and I'm just going to say NetTeller because I'm familiar with Jack Henry, and I'm not saying that they are or aren't. I'm just picking a domain name that I think everybody's familiar with. But let's say Dollar Bank was a Jack Henry shop, and you've got dollar.bank, and then you're redirecting into the NetTeller. If Jack Henry or Fiserv or whoever is not ready, is there a concern there with regards to sending somebody from a .bank bank site into a non.bank online banking environment? Or because that's encrypted with an EV-SSL cert and has extra layers of protection on it, is that not really as big of a deal?
It's enough of a deal that we're really looking very closely at what kind of restrictions we want to put in place associated with redirection, because it's really the same issue. And that's why we're working so closely with all the cores to understand what their implementation challenges are and to help solve them.
Good. Okay. So you know, the likelihood, like you said, there were what, maybe 40 or so banks around the nation that are doing this now. Hopefully when the majority get on board, the data centers are all going to be there, and it won't be as big of a deal. But until that happens, that might very well be happening, but you guys are keeping an eye on it.
Well, those are going to reach a critical mass of
Sure.
banks where the cores are going to have no alternative but to address it. A third of domestic commercial banks in our country now have .bank approved domains, or at
Right.
least, you know, they've gone through that registration process. They haven't deployed them yet. You know, clearly that number is going to increase, and I do think there's going to be a time where, you know, the cores are going to have a market imperative.
Yep. Good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put the closing slide back up again with all of your contact information. So while it is here, I see we are at the top of the hour, and I didn't think we'd have any problem filling 60 minutes, and didn't disappoint. But this has been good information. It's been great to get an update. It's been great to chat with you as well. It's been a while. But in closing, anything else that you want to mention or suggest as kind of parting words?
Read the guide. Implement the domains. Get moving.
Perfect. Good. Well, again, thank you so much for being part of my first show of 2016. Those of you that would like more of the Banker Education Series, I know in February, a good friend of mine and somebody that's very familiar with FinTech in the community banking space, JP Nichols, is going to be joining us and talking about some of the newer, more unconventional FinTech companies that community bankers maybe want to put on their radar screen that they may not necessarily be aware of, but are doing things that traditional banks are doing and might potentially pose a risk. So that announcement will be going up on the Banker Education Series page here very shortly. So you can go ahead and register for that. But until then, feel free to share the recording once it's available with friends and colleagues. And if you have any other questions, Doug's information is there. You all should hopefully have my information as well. I thank you again for joining me on today's webinar, and happy banking to all. And hopefully we'll see you again on February. Take care. Bye-bye.